Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We think Andrew might be having some audio challenge, so not to hold up this session anymore, just welcome you to PwC Sustainability webinar. Today we'll be looking at Post-COP27 outcomes and next steps. We have stakeholders here across both Nigeria and Ghana, and our guests and panelists are in the room, and we also want to welcome all attendees who have joined us early today. While we try to sort out the audio challenge with Andrew. Andrew, are you back now? You want to say a word? All right, while we do that, I'll just quickly call on the country senior partner and regional senior partner for PwC in West Market area, Uyi Apata, to give us an opening remark. But before that, we just quickly want to do some housekeeping. We move to the next slide, host. This is just what we'll be going through today. We'll have an opening remark by Uyi, keynote speech by Lulu Kugel, ESG Africa leader. Then we'll have our panel session, which I'm sure we are all, get to have. Looking forward to that. A quick presentation around our ESG capabilities appeared to PwC, and a closing remark by country senior partner for PwC Ghana, Visha Shabo. Next slide, please. You'll find that you've been put on mute. This session is being recorded so that we can we can share with you, and you can reference this session after now, so that will be shared with you afterwards. You'll find that you've been put on mute just to reduce disruptions, but you can interact. We want it to be as interactive as possible by using the chat area to drop your questions. You'll find it in the bottom right-hand area of your screen for those using a PC, on the lower part of your phone if you are using a handset. And we hope to, and you can drop those questions even starting now, and we will take them when we have the panel session. It's now my pleasure to welcome Uyi Apata for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Silva. And I think Andrew is back on. I'm almost tempted to say Andrew was hampered by severe weather constraints in line with the topic for today. So that's an excuse. Good morning and welcome to this PwC Sustainability webinar. We're looking at the outcomes of COP27 and seeing the next steps. A consensus has emerged in recent years that environment, social and governance, ESG, as we know it, these issues are crucially important for the world. ESG is more than ticking the boxes, as we've seen in recent years. It's about making a real difference for your businesses and our world, creating the kind of sustained outcomes that drive value and, of course, fuel growth while strengthening our environment and societies. In November last year, global attention was turned to Egypt, where we had COP27, which was holding on conversations focused on climate crisis, including the role of businesses and what they can actually play to champion solutions for climate adaptation, finance, mitigation, and resilience. At the end of the discussion, several commitments were made. I know most African countries extracted commitments, and all aimed at accelerating corporate and country actions for climate change. One key consensus coming out of this is the need to turn climate commitments into actions. It is very clear that businesses, governments, investors, and societies need to work together to harness these bold new ways to accelerate and tackle climate change and its knock-on impact for water and food security, health, livelihoods, and more. In line with our purpose, that's our PwC purpose of building trust in society and solving very important problems, we are pleased to host today's webinar, which brings together stakeholders from Nigeria and Ghana in particular, and of course, I'm sure across the world, to engage around the key takeaways from COP27, including those implications and commitments made in public and private sectors. We've assembled a star cast, an experienced panel of discussants who will share the insights on the theme. And through this session, we hope to help shape the climate change policy directions, programs, and plans of both countries and businesses in both markets going forward. Today's session actually reinforces the key messages of our new equation, our global strategy, which holds that with the profound changes in the world today, our clients can only succeed by creating a virtuous circle between earning trust on one hand and delivering sustained outcome. For us, ESG is more than good intentions. It's about making that difference for your business and our world. It's about delivering lasting outcomes that not only win for businesses, but win for society. And I think that's becoming very clear today. It's about evolving solutions that drive value and fair growth while strengthening our environment and society. So I believe this session is timely and a way to kickstart the new year. Let me specifically thank Lulu Krugel, our ESG leader. Thanks, Lulu, and Happy New Year. And of course, our distinguished discussants from both Nigeria and Ghana, who will be introduced shortly. I also welcome over 130 participants. Enjoy the deliberations and more importantly, be positioned to put everything into action. Thank you very much and all the best.
Thank you, Louis. This is Andrew Nevin from PwC. I compare for the day, but I was a little bit late coming to the party. You can see my video, but not my voice. I think you can hear me now. And Uwe, thank you so much for those introductory remarks. We have a fantastic lineup, as Uwe said today. On that, the next thing on the agenda is we're going to hear from Lulu Krugel. Lulu, as Uwe said, is the PwC Africa ESG leader, and she's going to give us some thought starters around what's happened out of COP27 and how it impacts all of us. Lulu, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and lovely to join you. And thank you for the kind words, Andrew and Uwe. So if we can move on, I have prepared like 3-4 slides with just a few key messages that I want to share with you. But I think maybe just as a start, while we are getting that up, can I maybe just ask the team, should I share from my end, or will you be able to share the slides? Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. Okay, so as PwC Global, we went into COP27 with a couple of expectations of things that we wanted to hear. And that's what you see on the left-hand side of the screen there. And on the right-hand side is what came out of it in terms of focus. So we feel that everything that was initially part of our discussions were addressed in some way or another, but it did receive different levels of attention. And I think that's the interesting thing. So first of all, probably the key theme that came out at COP27, and we had quite a big PwC contingent there, was the focus on loss and damage. And it was quite an emotive discussion. I'm pretty sure you all picked up in the media that some of the discussions went late into the night to actually get to agreements around that. The second point, climate justice, which we thought would be there, but also maybe not one of the or receiving the level of attention that it did. And we're happy to see, and I think specifically from developing markets, to see the level of focus that there was specifically on loss and damage and climate justice. And then the third point was relooking the financial system in particular, how we fund renewable energy, how we fund climate initiatives, how we fund adaptation, what do we do and how will we do it in different markets? And again, it was very interesting for me to note on the discussions that we had around that there's a broad realization that we cannot continue to do things the same way that we used to in the past in terms of the financial support that is needed. We need a combination of government, we need a private sector to get involved, we need development finance institutions to actually get those projects that might not be 100% economically and financially feasible over that mark where we can actually attract investors. So that was a big part of the discussion as well. And then supporting the clean energy transition, of course, for us from an Africa perspective, hugely important. But what I also just raised in a lot of the discussions is that I think as Africans, we often feel that the discussion is around the transition, but we have massive access issues on the continent as well. So that should also be part of the solutions that we're discussing. It shouldn't only be around how do we transition away from what we have. It should also be about how do we balance that with giving access to a lot of people on the continent that do not currently have access to energy, never mind clean energy. And then the fifth point, which was very interesting and quite controversial, is the acceleration of the decarbonization efforts. Now, at COP26, the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming cap, kind of, if we could call it that was put in place in the Paris Agreement was signed into the COP26 agreement. And in last year, at one point at COP27, it looked as though that might be under pressure. And if countries are not necessarily willing to commit to that, there was quite a bit of deliberation around that. And at the end of the day, that was kept in the wording, but what we didn't necessarily see is that acceleration of decarbonization efforts that we wanted to see. So we really wanted to see a movement between COP26 and COP27 of companies, countries in particular, saying this is what we're doing and this is how we're going to get to the target. And as PwC, we did some analysis, and at the moment, it looks like we're probably heading for around 2.5 to 3 degrees if we continue on the trajectory that we are. So what we're seeing at the moment is it's not enough. There is a lot that's being done, but it's not enough to actually accelerate our decarbonization. We can move on to the next slide, please. So I want to bring that back. So that all happened, and we all are living in a business environment where we really feel the pressures of cost in particular. I think there's not a single business or individual that can say at the moment that they're not feeling the impact of inflation and cost pressures. And from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Survey that was published just before Davos, they did an analysis of what the top 10 risks would be over the next 0 to 2 years, so the immediate risks, and what does it look like in the long run. I'm not going to go through that list, but what I want to show, or what I want you to notice or to see there, is if you look at the environmental risks, they all move up to the top 4 risks, and they all move up a few places in terms of our ability, and except maybe for the large-scale environmental damage incidents, which is number 6 and then drops to 10. But what does it tell us? It tells us that it almost feels like we're all staring at a flashlight at the moment. It's blinding us in terms of addressing cost and the immediate issues that we have. But we realize that climate and climate issues and social issues combined with that as well, if you look at 5, 7, etc., are going to become hugely important, but we're not dealing with it for a couple of reasons, and that's on the right-hand side of the slide there. It's because we expect public sector to do that, and that's in particularly if you look at the more developed markets. I think in developing markets, we understand the role that business should play as well. But we don't necessarily have faith in public sector's ability to do that. We have the continued socio-economic challenges and technological change, and we're not sure how we're going to do it. We don't have faith in our own ability to be able to address those issues in 10 years. So what does that tell us on the next slide, if you can move on to that? What should we do as business to actually address the issues that we have now and start to address the issues that we will have in future. PwC CEO survey that was published last week, and also a white paper that we shared at Davos, sets out what areas of focus we think is necessary for business to actually to get us to move on the issues that we have now and to start addressing the issues that we know is coming in future. The first is looking at how resilient are we? Are we able to further reduce the impacts of things like water use, energy use? Those are obvious ones, but if we really think about where our businesses are we as resilient to cost shocks that might come from outside and other shocks like environmental shocks? You had in Nigeria the massive floods as well last year. In South Africa, we currently have a heat wave. We had, I would say, too much rain probably in the beginning of the season. We ended up planting a bunch of crops, and now those crops are not getting the rain that they need. And yes, okay, that's not necessarily a unique situation, but those are some of the things that we need to deal with. How do we capitalize then as the next step? So we've looked at our resilience, we address shocks that might come. How do we capitalize on opportunities and grow? How do we make sure that we identify potential opportunities from ESG and use that as a business competitive advantage? And that is a shift that is happening with a lot of companies, but not everybody's there yet. We very much have a view of looking at first, and I understand, but compliance, etc. But how do we start to change our mind to think about the opportunities? And then lastly, collaborative outcomes. This is not something that will be done by one company on its own. How do we collaborate as an industry? How do we collaborate with our suppliers to get that done? And we can move on to the last slide that I have here. And that is, how our thinking and our journey should evolve. Basically and I think most companies at least are at a compliance, in a compliance space. There's very few, if any, that's still in the disregard and completely ignoring these challenges. We're all there. How do we move to a position where we can actually get value from ESG? And that is possible. It is. It's not the natural way of thinking maybe about ESG and ESG challenges at the moment, but depending where you are, we had a client, for example, in the financial services industry that said, well, we need to understand where the needs are going to be, because where is money and funding going to flow, where the needs are going to be, and transitioning to clean energy, addressing health and social issues. Those will all be areas where there will be needs. So how do we focus our business on that? So that's basically it from me. I'm going to hand over to the fantastic panel that is with you today. The key message is just, how do we are in a very real, very challenging environment as business. How do we use that and the movements that we have in that space to actually set us up to address some of the challenges and some of the things that might be coming down the road. Just sharing there with you as well, in terms of what we're doing as PwC as well, in terms of our net zero journey and the steps that we're taking. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but again, just to say that, it's not only a conversation that we're having with you as our clients, it's something that we take really serious as a business. And this is one example in our net zero journey in terms of how we're doing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lulu, for that. I mean, some sobering things to reflect on. I mean, when we hear about the potential for a change in temperature of 2.5 to 3 degrees, I think we all know now the consequences of that and the climate volatility and, of course, events that have happened around the world. You talked about South Africa, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, India, rivers in China, rivers in the United States, the droughts there. So it's happening. But I took some real positives away from what you said. I mean, one positive is that everyone actually recognizes now in the medium term, over a decade, that this is the most important issue for the planet, not just the most important issue, the most important 4 issues for the planet. And that was really I think gives us pause for optimism. I think the other thing that really encourages us is there is this recognition that we all need to do it together. It's not up to one company or one government, and everyone needs to play their part on it. And if we do that, we can be successful. The third thing that really encourages me is the younger generation. So Lulu is a younger generation, and of course, we have the younger generation coming up on the panel and their commitment to make change on that. So with that, I'd like to introduce a Nigerian superstar, Rukaya El-Rufai, who is a sustainability partner for PwC Nigeria. Absolutely amazing woman doing amazing things for the country, and she has assembled a panel of equally amazing people who are really trying to make a difference and solve the climate issue for Nigeria and for Africa. So Rukaya, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. So in November last year, the world and business leaders gathered at Sharm el-Sheikh for the 27th Conference of Parties, popularly known as COP27. For those that attended or followed the conference, I don't know about you, but for me, the most memorable and thought-provoking statement made at that conference was by the UN Secretary, Antonio Guterres, at the World Leaders Summit. He brings to attention that greenhouse gas keeps growing while the Earth is warming, and the planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. He did not mince words when he bluntly said that we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. Very importantly, he highlighted the risk of making climate change a back burner, given the grave and multifaceted challenges today, calling everyone to accelerate climate action. We are indeed in tough times, but COP has happened and the parties have agreed to some outcomes. You will agree with me that there could be no better set of actors in the climate space to have as our distinguished panelists today other than who we have as speakers to discuss these outcomes, what it means to us, our countries, and organizations. On this basis, please join me in welcoming the panelists to this panel session of the event. In the interest of time, I would simply introduce them by their names and designations, but what we have done is post their detailed profiles on our social media platforms for your reference. So the first person that I have the honor to introduce is Dr. Muntaga Umar Sadiq. Dr. Muntaga heads the Energy Transition Office of Nigeria, and they spearheaded the energy transition plan that was recently launched by the office, by the Vice President. So you are welcome, Dr. Muntaga. The next person I would like to introduce is Dr. Ndidi Inoli. Dr. Ndidi is a board member of the International Sustainability Standards Board. I'm sure you all recently saw the exposure draft of the IFRS standards on sustainability. She represents Africa and emerging countries on the board. You're welcome, Dr. Ndidi. Next is Dr. Daniel Tutu Benafor. He is the Acting Director of Climate Change Unit for the Environment Protection Agency of Ghana. You're welcome, Mr. Daniel. Next is Dr. Salisu Mohammed Ahiru. He is the DG and CEO of the National Council on Climate Change and has the humongous task of implementing the Climate Change Act and decarbonizing Nigeria. You're welcome, Dr. Ahiru. Next on the list is Mohammed Wakil. Mohammed is the country representative of the Global Energy Alliance for People on the Planet called GIAP, and he is here to talk about the importance of partnerships and alliances. You're welcome, Mohammed. Next is Engineer Oscar Amonu Neze. Engineer Oscar is the ES of the Energy Commission for Ghana. You are most welcome. Last but not the least is Mr. Seth Mahu, and Mr. Seth is the Deputy Director for Renewable Electricity at the Ministry of Energy in Ghana. You're welcome. So let's get started with the panel session. And I would like to start with you, Dr. Dahir. We all know that from the COP emphasized the need to accelerate climate action. It's highlighted the existing gaps in the system, including technology, finance, capacity for that climate action. Given the sense of urgency painted and, the impact, the devastating impact that climate change is having on the continent, what are Nigeria priorities in response to mitigating climate change and improving adaptation? How will you go about implementing the climate change? What should we look out for? And why should private sector act as well? What's in it for them? Over to you, Dr. Salisa, and please, you have 6 minutes to address this question. Thank you. Dr. Salisa, are you there? Dr. Salisa? Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, Rugaya.
Dr. Salisa?
Yes, please.
Yes, go
Please,
ahead.
I had difficulty hearing most of what you said. Is it possible for you to just quickly summarize what you said, the question, so that I can respond quickly?
Sure. So what I was saying is the COP has painted the urgency of climate action. It also has highlighted the gaps. So what my question to you is, in implementing climate action, what are your priorities? How would you go about implementing the Climate Change Act? What role will private sector play, and why should they take it seriously? What's in it for them? How will it impact them? You have 6 minutes, please, to answer the question. Dr. Nahiro?
Yes, it's just now that I got you back. So if it's, I got a piece of it. How do we intend to implement the climate change action as quickly as possible as far as Nigeria is concerned? And I think the government has taken the bold step of operationalizing the what we consider as the game changer, that is the passage of the Climate Change Act, and also the commencement of its implementation, which is the establishment of the Secretariat and then the National Council on Climate Change with sweeping powers, and then its application to various MDAs and also at different levels. And with a clear mandate, in fact, some of the key elements of this act include the issue of specificity in terms of what's needed to be done and by everybody. That is by way of now having in place a national action plan based on the 5-year cycle that MDAs and various entities will be held accountable, meaning that there will be inspections as well as regulations, and then the enforcement of these regulations. 2, it also sets out an agenda to establish a climate change fund, because we know that relying fully on development partners and what the Annex 1 countries are meant to be doing in terms of support to developing countries will not give us the desired results. So Nigeria is looking inwards to see how it can generate sufficient fund, a trust fund of sorts that will apply to all the activities of the climate change to drive Nigeria's response. Again, it also intends to establish a trading carbon a framework for carbon trading, and at the same time also establish a climate a tax system in conjunction with the federal revenue service. And to do this, the council is well situated now, instead of being at the behest of just ministries, departments, and agencies, it is domiciled right in the presidency with the president as the chairman of the council and the vice president as the vice, with about 13 ministers and key, entities, key stakeholders such as the petroleum, the NNPC, the Central Bank of Nigeria, as well as other key entities. And so far, we've seen a massive acceptance by both the local, that is, as well as national entities, and also at the international body for a lot of enthusiasm wanting to work and collaborate with the National Council. So for
Okay,
us,
okay, Dr. Ahir, sorry to come in because you have 2 more minutes. I need to ask about the role of private sector in helping you achieve, your climate goals, and why should they act? Why should they also act and support this initiative? Hello, Dr. Ahir, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you now.
So why should private sector act? Why should they support whatever you're going to roll out?
Yeah, in fact, the private sector has 2 main reasons. One, the obligations for them to imbibe the benefits associated with responding and their response adjusting to the vagaries of climate change, because it's going to be in their own interest. Private sector are going to be the drivers of the entire government policies. And 2, failure to do the needful in terms of implementation of these various regulations, it is also going to incur some penalties. But to a large extent, for them to be in tune with recent developments in the climate change space, it is going to be in their best interest to do this. They will have guarantee for sustainability, better profits, and then greater efficiency in terms of their resource utilization, and also the opportunities to generate, if they can, some additional funding in terms of investment, upskilling and scoping, and then also access to climate finance.
Thank you very much. You raised very important issues here that we would tackle later on. In the interim, let me move to Dr. Daniel to get the Ghana perspective. I mean, the vulnerabilities. Lulu mentioned the flood in Nigeria. Ghana is vulnerable to flood as well. 55,000 Ghanaians every year are vulnerable to flooding and other climate vulnerabilities. Considering this, what is Ghana's priorities in climate action, especially adaptation, and what risks do you see for the private sector as well? How will this impact them? Over to you, Dr. Daniel.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So colleagues, the issue at stake is not for government alone. The issue at stake is not for the private sector alone. The issue at stake, colleagues, is the fact that we all share a common resource, and that common resource is the airshed that we live in, the airshed that supports our businesses, the airshed that supports our livelihood, the airshed that supports our economies, and the airshed that is supposed to be supporting lives in future. Our colleagues, we have spent the last 27 years as a global community in marking time. And we cannot mince words about this. And we are on the course of missing the very crucial importance of keeping the global emissions well within the boundaries or well within the budget where we can meet the 1.5 or keep the 2-degree go enrich. Colleagues, that is what we have in front of us. Countries cannot do it alone, and we are happy that our senior brother Nigeria is taking the lead. So we cannot re-emphasize the urgency and the importance of working together as governments, as private sector, as communities. But to us in Ghana, facilitator, we see the issue at stake as not only to bring out policies to deal with the climate change risk that confronts our people. It is also a matter of how we can reform our businesses to take advantage of the opportunities that the new green economy offers to us. Yeah. So that is our approach, facilitator. We need to make sure that not only do we get the leadership across the world and everybody doing its fair share to deal with the problem, but facilitator, we also need to recognize the fact that countries have the right to use their resources in a way that these resources that we use will support the well-being of our people. And at the same time, work together to deal with the problem. So that's our approach. So our approach is that whilst we need new businesses, whilst we need businesses to think along the opportunities that the new economy presents, we also have the singular justification to better use our resources to support our economies and support our people.
Thank you. You make a very important point. And if you recall in Lulu's presentation, she spoke about climate justice. I mean, yes, there is, and I'll move to discuss energy because we're energy poor and we have abundance of natural resources. COP27 calls for, and I'm moving over to Dr. Muntaka Umar Sadiq. COP27 calls for a transformation of energy systems, to be more available, accessible, affordable, reliable, and resilient, especially with the global crisis and fallouts from the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Africa, you can argue, needs energy more than anybody else because of the poverty. There is a positive correlation between access to energy and development. And like Dr. Daniel mentioned, we have abundance of resources. Amidst the dilemmas faced, with clean energy and access and affordability, how can Africa provide energy sustainably while balancing, the just transition, so such that it provides true climate justice for Africa? Over to you, Dr. Muntaka, and please, you have 5 minutes to answer this. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Rukaya. Thank you, PwC, for the opportunity to speak, learn, as well as share our perspectives. I think to answer your question, I'd like to give some context and outline some of the important enablers to providing this sustainable energy across the continent. Firstly, we know that the problems are well defined, right? So nearly 1 billion people lack access to electricity, most of which are in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. Across the continent, even though we have 18% of global population, we generate just 3% of electricity. And so indeed, the dual challenges of energy poverty on the one hand, but also the impacts of climate change are quite pertinent in both in the continent and indeed in Nigeria today. And for us, actually, that provides the backdrop for being the first country to sort of develop this energy transition plan. And the truth is, just transitions or energy transitions really is, if you like, a heterogeneous term. It means different things to different countries, right? And so this is really a very context-specific conversation that needs to happen. Because in our context, it's really around diesel displacement. It's really around gas as a transition fuel, right? It's really around having the horizons right in terms of going, for example, from gas to sort of deploying solar capacity at an unprecedented scale, 5.3 gigawatts every year till 2060, and down the line, even green hydrogen. So this context-specific conversation is, I think, a very, very important one. And I think more importantly, as a continent, we need that space to industrialize, to harness our own resources, and also to do it in a manner that is sustainable, both for economic development as well as human capital growth. But to answer your question, I think in driving that acceleration, four things come to mind. One is really around the technology, both on and off grid, right? So on grid, evacuating and debottlenecking the utilities, so improving the performance therein. Secondly, is really around decentralized renewable energy, right? So scaling up solar home systems, as well as mini grids, and I think we're seeing some of those gains, particularly through the Rural Electrification Agency in Nigeria. The third piece, and I think is quite important, even coming on the back of COP, which was a COP of action, is really around market shaping. Market shaping, both in terms of kind of unlocking carbon markets, right, across the continent, but also market shaping, thinking more broadly across our individual borders. So if you think, for example, in terms of West and Central Africa, and harnessing some of the economies of scale, whether it's on grid connectivity, to also reduce supply costs. So thinking about these regional markets, I think, is another way to think about it. But also in terms of market shaping, is really around green manufacturing, right? So we must think about the value chains, right, and the important inputs and selective advantage that different countries have in terms of this industrialization effort. So I think this theme of green manufacturing is also another area to highlight. And I think perhaps the last piece is really around innovative financing. And I think, and for that, it's also kind of a broad term. One is there were discussions around this just energy transition partnership on the one hand, and how do different countries kind of build the case for mobilizing those sort of resources. Whilst at COP, the Indonesia JETP was announced, $20 billion, 10 for public, 10 for private. South Africa, $8.4 billion. What would it mean for different countries in Africa to play to that? In addition, having a robust pipeline of priority projects that will help to accelerate all of that. But I'll kind of stop there.
Thank you so much. Spot on time. Thank you. We really appreciate that. And I would like to call on Engineer Oscar. Dr. Muntaka ended with innovative financing. Initially, the finance was touched by DG or NCCC as well. The energy sector is capital intensive. There is a lot of green finance on the table, climate finance. Africa is not doing so well in accessing it. And of course, like Dr. Muntaka mentioned, it's about having viable projects as well that are well prepared to be able to access, some of this funding. How do you think private sector can leverage this pool of capital to support the energy transition in Ghana first? And you can touch on your perspective as well on Nigeria and other African countries. So over to you, Engineer Oscar. Thank you. You have 5 minutes too, please.
Thank you so much, Rukaya. I want to say that with the accessing of international funding for the development of the African continent in general, I have about 4 areas that I just want to touch on, just to make us understand the different methods in which Ghana and in Ghana in specific, we are using to be able to attract some of these funding. One, we have this drive of harnessing all skills and expertise. That is to say that we try to bring on board different skill sets to be able to attract some funds. So to be able to come up with a very comprehensive proposal to be able to attract some of these funds. So I believe that going forward, African countries to have this mindset that it should be a collective effort so as to be able to come up with a very solid proposal to attract some of these international funds. Secondly, we have different approach for different instruments. In Ghana, to better assess international funds for green projects, we have different approach needs that we employ for different instruments or different projects. For example, we recently had the Sustainable Use of Natural Resource and Energy Financing Program, that's the SUNREF. And with that, we got a concessional loan for that. And in this, we were able to come up with a 10% of the loan amount given to beneficiaries as grants. And then the 90% that the beneficiaries get out of that loan is what they only have to pay back. We also use another method that's for the Scale Up Renewable Energy Program investment plan. We had 4 components comprised of loan and grant. So it was a combination of loan and grant. So all I want to say is that we should have different approaches for different instruments or projects that we want to attract these funding for. The third thing that I want to suggest to most African countries is the government or public contributing as a counterpart funding. This approach also works very well. In Ghana, we've had to do this a couple of times, and it's helped us to get funding for the SREP, for example, where the government of Ghana had a component that came in as a counterpart funding, and we're able to attract these international funds. The last is what I call the commercial bank or private as a counterpart funding. Now, because public capital is not always transformational with local banks, we always get these ones. For example, we had a program for the Accelerating Solar Action Program, ASAP. And there we got some expected funding programs from the private sector, also participating, coming in as a counterpart funding. So we got a commercial bank to come in. And then there was another one that we got, AFDP, also coming in to help as a counterpart fund for the international funding that we're trying to attract. So I want to say that in all these methods, you need to find out exactly what type of fund you're getting and going with a different approach, because you can't use the same approach always to attract it. You will not get it. So this is what we have been doing in Ghana. It's worked so far for us. And I want to suggest that to all African continents, all African countries on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Key takeaway is different approaches to different projects, and you try and customize. I will now move over to Mohammed Wakil. DG Climate Change has painted the kind of initiatives from carbon budgets to emissions trading platforms. Dr. Daniel has emphasized that this climate action needs to be PPP led, and we've heard so far the need for partnerships, the need for capacity building, the need for technology access, and the need for finance, especially innovation finance. Can you tell us what GEP is doing? GEP is a success story. How can partnerships be formed, and what do you see as the critical success factor for such partnerships to thrive? Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Rukaya. So I think the best way to answer this question is to first of all introduce GEAP properly. So GEAP is the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. It is an organization that was created to help the developing economies to transition to net zero. Part of the reason why an effort for developing economies was needed is because the developed world has already achieved full energy access, and developing countries are still working towards that. And so a special approach has to be taken. We're currently in 19 countries across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The alliance is made up of a number of organizations, philanthropies, multilateral and bilateral development organizations, development finance institutions, and other major stakeholders in the energy sector and in global development. We work together by partnering with individual countries, first of all at the government level, and then creating a program that supports the private sector in those countries. And so I can talk a little bit about the Nigeria country program. but perhaps you have
Yes,
another
please
question.
go ahead.
All right.
Go
So
ahead, but you have 2 minutes, please, and it will be
yes,
interesting. What can other partnerships learn from GF's success story? So over to you, 2 minutes, please.
yes. Thank you. So in Nigeria, following the announcement of the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan at COP26, GIAP partnered with the Nigerian government to build a program that addresses the country's priorities. These include strengthening the enabling environment for the transition to net zero, supporting the private sector to innovate, and encouraging entrepreneurship that is locally generated, and also to mobilize the capital needed to provide these energy solutions, and also finding ways to reduce the perceived risk of these kind of investments. In Nigeria, we have a number of projects across 3 or so different themes. We are coordinating closely with parties with already established programs such as the World Bank, African Development Bank, FCDO, Power Africa, GIZ, and the wider donor community in Nigeria. We're trying to help Nigeria achieve full energy access and also economic growth from that energy access using distributed renewable energy. This has a largely off-grid focus. We're helping to create solutions that will replace petrol and diesel self-generation of electricity. And we're working on creating the enabling environment by supporting the Energy Transition Office, the National Council on Climate Change, helping the country in its system planning and integrated resource planning of the sector. And also we're funding and supporting the Africa Carbon Market Initiative, which will help Nigeria as well as the rest of the continent.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and thanks to keeping to time. Dr. Ndidi, I'll move over to you. Mohammed mentioned net zero. He mentioned all these wonderful things and all the wonderful initiatives that have been introduced is not possible without a global baseline, because climate change is science-based. It's very science-based, it's data-centric. At the COP, there was the agreement to establish a global baseline. And what we saw was the FRCN of Nigeria announced early adoption at an earlier conference in Egypt, same Egypt. African finance ministers, endorsed the IFRS standards. What is, in your view, how can Nigeria and Ghana contribute to this carbon-based and global baseline? Why are the standards, the IFRS standards that your board, is spearheading, why is it important for corporate reporting? And, how can the adoption help with unlocking this capital? Because we've heard the need for the finance, facilitate trade and enable all these wonderful projects we've had, such as the carbon market initiatives, the carbon budgets and so on. So over to you, Dr. Ndidi. You have 5 minutes too, please.
My camera has just disappeared, but I hope you can still hear me.
We can actually see you as well, so go ahead.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Thank you also for the very interesting and very important contributions of my prior panelists, who've really spoken to a number of issues and have spoken to on the one hand, the risks. Obviously, Africa is one of the most affected, even though we are contributing the least to emissions, and also spoken to the opportunities, especially in terms of attracting capital flows and greening the economy and finding alternatives and also addressing issues of access. What the ISSB is focused on is facilitating global comparability of sustainability reporting. You probably already know that we have embedded in the ISSB standards. The first two will be issued in the first half this year. S1, which is on general sustainability requirements, and the second, which is very climate focused. We call that the S2. And from a risk and opportunity perspective, our focus is on investors and on capital markets, but also on interoperability with other standards. Now, what we've also already seen, which was very exciting, was announced at COP27, was that a first mover, or the first mover, was the Nigerian Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, who has one, on the one hand, because you were asking how do Nigeria and Ghana contribute, clarity in terms of the legislative mandate for the regulator to engage, starting to prepare in terms of adoption readiness. I know that Nigeria is in the process of creating an adoption readiness working group with a number of stakeholders. One of the things that the ISSB announced at the COP27 was support and capacity building to ensure, and also backing the focus of IOSCO, which also has initiated a comprehensive capacity building program aimed at assisting the securities regulations in their own preparations to adopt the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. Our objective is, by that global comparability across jurisdictions and through what we call the building block approach that ensures, on the one hand, interoperability between the sustainability standards and the financial standards, which of the IFRS Foundation are already used across 144 jurisdictions and across all of Africa, to ensure that there's interoperability between the sustainability disclosures and the financial statements, but also specifically to complement jurisdictional initiatives, which we've heard a lot of in the room today. So capacity building is a key area we're focused on. We're also developing a digital taxonomy so that on day one, digital reporting and sustainability disclosures will be possible. That also makes comparability much easier. And this is, of course, very important in terms of unlocking the significant capital flows that we require. One of the areas we've also focused on is we're working on internationalizing the industry standards, which we inherited from SASB, which also enable essentially the looking at sustainability from an industry perspective, because the objective is not to increase the burden or the cost of reporting, but rather to allow companies to incorporate and evaluate the risks and opportunities that we're facing that are sustainability and climate related, so that we're better able to build climate resilience. What else can Ghana and Nigeria do other than preparedness and really just declaring adoption of the ISSB standards, so that we can also work collaboratively to build that capacity or build those skills that were referenced by the previous speaker, is of course ensuring that, you know, participation in the consultations. The new priorities will focus on biodiversity, human capital, human rights, and connectivity, which is really important. And Africa's voice is really important in this standard setting process.
Thank you very much. Very succinct and nicely put. And I mean, the next big thing would be nature-based and nature accounting and so on after carbon. I would now move to Dr. Dahiru. Dr. Dahiru, I mean, we've heard, Dr. Ndidi, and, they're helping with the standard setting landscape to help, have that comparability and the bedrock of, the emissions trading, carbon budgets and all that. And at COP, there were discussions and negotiations on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is on carbon markets. We heard they're focused on capital markets. We heard Dr. Muntaka with his discussions around innovative financing and the need to leverage private capital. Engineer also mentioned and buttressed that point. So my question to you is, should we anticipate pricing on carbon? We're already seeing, the CBAM, the cross-border adjustment mechanism passed by EU. Nigerian exports will be affected. Exporters will have to start pricing and paying carbon. I know the finance bill includes, incentives, to encourage private sector to invest in decarbonization projects. So should we anticipate pricing on carbon, such as carbon tax? What are the plans for ETS, the emissions trading scheme? Dr. Dahir, are you there? Hello? Okay. Dr. Dahir, can you hear me? Okay, let me pass this question on to Muntaka. Muntaka, can you please take this question?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm not sure you can see me, but
Yes,
yeah,
I can hear
but I
you.
think okay, perfect. I think a good way to approach this really is perhaps use Nigeria as a case study. One is that our energy transition plan, for example, estimates that achieving net zero by 2060 will cost about $410 billion in excess of business as usual spending, right? And that translates into roughly a $10 billion annual financing gap. All right. So the scale of this need, I think, is significant, right? And I think it kind of gives the right backdrop, right, to the importance of almost harnessing domestic and kind of more sustainable financing mechanisms, right? In a sense, where would that capital come from? And so as we think through unlocking carbon markets, it's with that in mind. It's really recognizing the insufficient financing that is currently available for Africa's just transition and the significant potential available on the continent to generate considerable capital from quality carbon credits. And I think this, kind of links to this Africa Carbon Market Initiative to sort of address some of the market fragmentation and information asymmetry, because I think it indicates that Nigeria could mobilize about $600 to $800 million per annum in capital by 2030. And that's, of course, if you consider that an average price of say $20 per ton of carbon from voluntary carbon markets and potentially supporting about 3 million jobs. The plan really outlines 13 action programs that really cut across the credit supply side in terms of generation, but also standards, intermediation, financing, and the right signaling on the back of demand. During the COP28, we I think led by the DG, we participated in sort of advanced market commitments that were announced across the continent, and so incorporating all of the important building blocks on the supply and demand side to unlock the market beyond our borders, I think is sort of an important piece. And as the law has been passed, so the NCC really is the vehicle in country, right, to support the verification process that will be important, the registry, as well as the importance levers, whether it's on the tax and compliance management aspects. And so the National Council on Climate Change, led by the DG, has that important role in ensuring not only that there is sort of a primary market, but also even a secondary market that will enhance private sector participation. I think I've done my 5 minutes, so I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much. Very succinct indeed. And I would pass this on to Dr. Daniel. So we hear the Ghana perspective, especially with this Africa Carbon Market initiatives, and you stressed the importance of leveraging private sector. So what is the Ghanaian perspective in this regard, and speaking to what Dr. Muntaka has said? Dr. Daniel, can you hear us? Dr. Daniel, can you hear us? Dr. Daniel Tutu, are you on the call? Okay, can I call on Engineer Oscar to comment on this, please?
Thank you very much, Rukaya. I think I support the view shared by the previous speaker on the development of the carbon market. I think it's something that we in Africa will need, that to be able to help us to industrialize and to develop our countries. And in Ghana, we will need over 562 billion US dollars to be able to approach the net zero targets that we've had for ourselves. We have a long-term framework of from 2022 to 2070 to reach that target. And in doing that, we've estimated about 200 metric tons of carbon dioxide emission being avoided throughout that period of getting to the net zero target. So looking at this amount of money that we need, I think the carbon markets implementation will help more or less alleviate some of the financial burden also already on us, to help us to accelerate in getting to this goal that we have set for ourselves. And I believe it runs through most of the African countries, and it's something that will help us to develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I ask our distinguished panelist, Seth, a question, so Seth, please get ready. I'd like to remind the audience, we're heading towards the question and answers session. So please drop in your questions. Any questions you have for any of our panelists, you can drop it. We'll spend 10 minutes taking the questions. So Seth, coming back to you, renewable energy has been discussed. We've heard it. It's the best, most affordable, and faster, fastest way of ensuring energy gets to people in Africa. I don't know, based on all the discussion, how do you see Africa accelerating adoption, especially solar? We're really endowed with these renewable energy resources. You heard Dr. Muntaka talk about diesel generator systems. Why is solar? What does Africa need to do to leverage and harness abundance in these renewable resources that we can actually channel to generate electricity in a quick way for our people? Over to you, Mr. Seth.
Thank you very much, Rukia. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
And thanks for the opportunity to give my perspective on what we can do at the continental level to be able to, upskill renewable energy in our energy mix. I think Africa has a very big market, a population of almost about 1.3 billion. That creates a very big opportunity for us to be able to increase renewable energy development. Secondly, if you look at the level of access to electricity in particular on the continent, it ranks among the least globally, and that to be able to increase the contribution of renewable energy. If you take the African Free Continental Trade Area, that gives us a very big market, which can also serve as a lever to be able to increase renewable energy uptake. But the most important thing that I would want to highlight here is, one, fundamentally having the right, policies in place, which I believe from the earlier speakers, we've been able to articulate some of the good things they are doing. Nigeria has just, developed its energy transition plan. Ghana has also launched its energy transition plan. These two countries alone, if you combine their energy transition plan in terms of investment outlook, we are talking of almost about 2 trillion US dollars. That's quite significant, and that's a very big opportunity that we think we can leverage on to go to do that. Another important thing that we need to look at is that energy development has not come out of the blue. We need to change the economic fundamentals of the continent. The continent has been raw material led all this, so there is very little value addition to commodities on the continent, and that does not create the sort of demand for electricity, to accelerate economic transformation. So I think we also need to look at that, work on the economic structures, and go into value addition. I think one earlier speaker spoke about green manufacturing. It creates a very huge opportunity for the continent to be able to, accelerate renewable energy uptake. And I think another thing we need to do from infrastructure point of view is that when you look at renewables, it does not flourish on its own. You need other energy interventions to be able to make renewable energy complemented with other reliable base load energy sources to do that. So we need to, one, fast track the development of the blueprint that will accelerate the integration of the power pools that we have on the continent. For example, now we have the West African power pool, we have the East African power pool. Ghana might have a huge solar resource. Kenya may have a very huge geothermal resource. Geothermal comes in as a base load. So if we are able to integrate all these power pools, we can use the strength of that to be able to address the challenges that comes with, some of these variable renewables resources, and that will help us scale up. So it's very, very important that we accelerate that process so that we get to a point when we can have a continental power pool that will create the biggest energy market to unlock investment in that space. Another important thing that I think it's worth talking about here is the fact that we also need to improve the human capital base of the continent. We need to ensure that we have people who are well trained and are able to manage these resources effectively. Last and not the least, Rukia, is that we can use renewable energy to accelerate electricity, particularly in off-grid communities, if we are to meet Agenda 2063 of the AU and the SDG 7 goals. So it is important that we identify all these levers and use renewable energy to, achieve these targets.
Thank you very much. And this brings us to go quickly into the questions and answers. I can see one question was posted here. So there is an earlier question from Mr. Emmanuel Obayemi. And his question is, governments are constantly trying to increase the ease of doing business. Will introducing a carbon market systems not go against the agenda of the government to make business easier? And Dr. Muntaka, can you please answer this question? Thank you. So, Dr. Muntaka, are you there?
Yes, I am. I think, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, did you get the question?
The question was around ease of doing business.
Repeat it.
And if there was any conflict with respect to the plans around carbon trading, no?
Yes, so governments are constantly trying to increase the ease of doing business. Will introducing a carbon market systems not go against this agenda of government to make businesses easier? So will it be a barrier instead of an enabler? The carbon market system.
Yeah, got you. Yes, thank you. I think it's these are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? I think that on the one hand, the efforts around, if you like, market reforms and creating an enabling environment, and in fact, from the perspective of the Energy Transition Office, there's been efforts around, for example, liberalization of off-grid licensing from potentially 1 to 5 megawatts, so that it is consistent with the need to ramp up solar capacity at that scale that we're talking about. Two issues, debottlenecking some of the dispatch orders, VAT, and all that. So on the one hand, I think these enabling reforms kind of help to support private sector investments, right? I mean, ultimately, this is around kind of addressing underlying constraints. And I think some of the plans around unlocking carbon markets does the same thing, right? So we really see it as an enabler to private sector participation in the sector, right? If you think through, for example, what having advanced market commitments will mean for the sector, right? It helps in terms of mitigating some of those, counterparty risks, and transaction risks, and even helps to enhance collaterals and things that would actually help to open up the space for kind of private sector investments in this area, both locally as well as internationally. So I kind of want to shatter that misconception. The second thing to add to is that more broadly, clean energy transitions really involve a growing reliance on private sources of finance, right? As well as greater use of lower cost debt, off balance sheet structures, and kind of international capital. And so having this kind of carbon climate financing in the menu of options really helps in terms of, having the right kinds of guarantees, having the right blended financing, and really reducing the cost of capital that'll be required to have the sorts of investment flows towards, the transition and greening the economy. Over.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the next question has to go to you, given that you're responsible for the Energy Transition Office, and this is from Fumi Ogunlesi from Citibank, and her comment and questions goes as follows. Thanks to all for an excellent and timely session. My question relates to the Nigeria's Just Energy Transition Partnership. South Africa announced its 8 billion JETP during COP26. During the U.S. envoy on climate change, John Kerry's visit to Nigeria last year, Nigeria announced that it was seeking its own JETP. What is the status, and what should the authorities be doing to ensure a successful proposal to the G7 for its own JETP, and hopefully at COP28? So, Montaka, please, in 1 minute, if you can, because we're actually quite pressed for time. So over to you.
Perfect. I'll try to stick to time. So I think the first thing to add is that the JETP approach, the Just Energy Transition approach, is one of 4, if you like, financing mechanisms that we are exploring. They include, yes, 1, the Just Energy Transition Partnership. Second is really around this carbon market development. Third is having a pipeline of projects. We have a $23 billion investment opportunities that cuts across both on and off grid and the value chain. So things like gas flare commercialization projects, the 14 IPP projects, clean cooking expansion, and a few others, to have almost the underlying investment plan to raise capital. So I kind of wanted to give that context. Now, in terms of the JETP, I think we have begun to engage the EU and the G7. Also actually made a formal request. I think our case for investment, is largely around, diesel displacement, right? And having the right financing mechanisms to support the scale up. So I think the status therein obviously is that, we are kind of advanced in our negotiations. The VP, who chairs the Energy Transition Working Group, has led those efforts. I think you would have seen that we have begun roadshows to the US, the UAE, and received also had kind of meetings too with the EU. This is an ongoing conversation because there are milestones and windows to engage. And as you know, we are going through a political transition, right? So we are kind of managing the progress of this accordingly. But I'll stop here now and speak further if required.
Thank you so much. I'd like to especially thank our distinguished panelists, our audience, for your kind attention, and your panelists for your invaluable and insightful contributions. Thank you. I'm sure you will agree with me. This has been a very insightful session, and I do hope we all go back and reflect on this and take the risks and opportunities seriously. We've heard it's been quite private sector focused, and I wish you all the best. So over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Rukaya, and apologies that we weren't able to take all the questions with the panelists, but sincere thanks to Rukaya, but especially to our esteemed panelists. I certainly learned a lot listening to this. I took away a few things. One thing I took away is, I think Africa is in good hands in terms of managing our position within this just energy transition, making sure that we do things that support what happens in Africa and gets the resources that we need on the terms that are available. And I think the real kudos to our public sector panelists and just the depth of understanding and the strategic thinking and the action by the public sector is really commendable. I also really enjoyed listening to Dr. Ndidi, and it was very helpful to know that there's increasing standards, because I think the whole climate transition, climate change agenda is very complex from a scientific viewpoint. Lots of numbers are being thrown around, and to have know that we're in good hands in terms of being able to standardize that is really critical. So thank you, our esteemed panelists. We really appreciate your presence this morning. At this stage, I'd like to have us play a brief video about PwC's capabilities in the ESG space. And following that, Richard Ansong, a brilliant young partner from our PwC Ghana, is going to say a few words.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning to participants and panelists. That's quite an insightful conversation. Thank you for that. I guess based on what has been said, it is clear that our world has changed significantly, either as a result of declining trust or polarization or age or disruption in technology or asymmetry, i.e. wealth disparity. Consumers and employees have increasingly different expectations of the world and businesses they buy from and work with. Shareholders and lenders are under significant pressure from regulators, that has been outlined by our distinguished panelists, and the market to demonstrate that they are acting responsibly and then also investing sustainably. All these people will be making various choices as to which organization they want to work with. I guess the biggest question is that would it be yours? All stakeholders will be looking at your organizations from their own lenses. The good thing is that you have the opportunity to present or show what is behind it. What is your impact on the environment? What is your contribution to your community in which you operate? And then also how you conduct your business, i.e. governance. I guess if you are on this call and you're wondering how are you going to navigate all that and also take advantage of the various opportunities that there are, I will say worry no more. PwC have got you. We have trained over 100,000 of our employees on ESG. We've also have about 3,000 ESG specialists across our network. We also have about 950 sustainability experts scattered across our network. In Africa specifically, we have over 100 sustainability experts across. As a community of solvers, leveraging on our core values of care, making a difference, acting with integrity, and working together and reimagine the possible, we believe we are well placed to help you navigate the challenges that are posed by what your stakeholders are asking for. Wherever you may find yourself on your ESG transformation journey, i.e. being at the strategy level, being it at the implementation, measurement, or developing key metrics to be able to publish and disclose to your stakeholders, PwC have you covered. Outlined on your screen are the various services and capabilities that we have to supporting our business community. We are looking forward to interacting with you and engaging you on how we can work together with you to be able to navigate this journey. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate that. I mean, we are here to talk to you about the ESG issues. They're not simple. There's lots of complexity in there, but as I said, we've got lots of experts. The world has learned a lot, and PwC has learned a lot over the last few years about this. So at this point, I'd like to call on Vish, the country senior partner from Ghana, to say some final remarks before I wrap up. Vish, can you hear me? Okay, so I've just been informed that Vish is not able to make it this morning, as I think people are aware. Ghana has a lot of challenges at the current time beyond just ESG or the energy transition. I think he's involved in some meetings with the government at the moment on that. So let me do the wrap up on that. Again, I want to start out by sincerely thanking particularly all of the more than 200 people who joined us today. I think as we go away from this session, we really kind of recognize this is the single most important issue that faces the planet, the climate change agenda, the climate change challenge, the impact of global warming from human activities on that. But as we found out today, I think we should all take heart from what we've learned, and particularly what we've learned about Africa's response and West Africa's response in Ghana and Nigeria to these issues around the just energy transition, around the resiliency, around getting the right kind of financing, around government policies, and working with the private sector to do that. So with that, let me close the meeting. We're at 11:30, which is our allotted time. And again, sincere thanks to all of the participants who joined us today, and sincere thanks to our esteemed panelists who contributed so much today and are contributing so much to these issues in Africa. And just leave you with the thought that no matter what organization that you're with at the moment, These are very critical issues. Please come speak to us and engage with us, and together we can work through this. So thank you so much, and God bless Nigeria and Ghana and Africa.
Thank you, Andrew. Please, we'll just watch briefly the video around our ESG capabilities as before you drop off from the call. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Resiliency in action. We figured out a solution.
There's no volume.
Thank you, Adam, and I'm sorry there seemed to be no volume on the video. The images are self-explanatory. We'll be sending everyone on the webinar today a link to that short video. As the video says, there's no plan B. The only plan A we have is dealing with the ESG and the climate change issues. So with that, let me close our webinar today. Again, a sincere thank you to all the participants, all the panelists, and all the PwC people who contributed to today. And everyone think about what they can do to make sure we get through this climate emergency. Thank you so much. Goodbye.